Homestuck. Homestuck is a difficult comic to discuss. It's so big, it's so dense, it's so Homestuck that there are multiple running jokes about how it's impossible to understand. Most people who make videos on Homestuck get this, and usually try to come at it from an angle. They may discuss one specific part of the world, give an overview of the fandom and its wildest stories, and on occasion, may even attempt a plot deep dive in order to explain it to those unlikely to ever read it. This video is none of those things, but I will provide recommendations to those looking for those experiences. No, this video is, well, I guess you could call it a literary analysis. See, I want to find out why we liked Homestuck, why later we didn't, and why it seems like every attempt to revisit it after its end is met with more and more vitriol. I want to know why. There will never be another Homestuck. That phrase has been plaguing me for a while now, maybe since September of last year, 2025. The Homestuck animated pilot. Created by Andrew Hussey, directed by Sky Henwood, and animated by Spindleroo, the sister studio to Spindlehorse of VivziePop and Hazbin Hotel fame. It was executive produced by Vivian Medrano, aka VivziePop, and Toby Radiation Fox, creator of Undertale. It was released September 27th, 2025, and at the time of writing has a cool 2.3 million views. Impressive numbers for sure. I'm pretty sure I'd kill to have a video do that well, but notably a bit behind some of its contemporaries. It has fewer views than one of the animatic pages from the comic S Collide re-uploaded to YouTube, and fewer views than the Homestuck fandom analysis I recommended earlier by Sarah Zed. Yes, I'm going with the pronunciation Zed, that's how she pronounces it, get over it. It was hardly a failure. I don't really buy the idea floating around that it's been quietly cancelled, but it can't be denied that the Homestuck fandom, at one point the biggest force on the internet, didn't really show up for this one. It also got a response that was mixed. Okay, presuming that the comments haven't been moderated to oblivion, reading through them honestly isn't that bad. It's mostly people complaining about the pacing, about how it doesn't really do anything to make sense of the source material's pretty dense and confusing plot and world building, which, you know, welcome to Homestuck. I also spotted quite a few people who seemed inspired to look into the source material, and others who were reminded of their love for this classic webcomic. Outside of the comments section of this video, though, going through TikTok comments, people are much harsher, and not in a way that I would call very constructive. Just like every other TikTok comment section, the ones concerning this pilot tend to be full of casual misinformation, outright dismissal of the pilot, and piles of hate towards VivziePop as an artist and person. Currently, one of the biggest videos on this channel, Lily Polydora, is a near feature-long critique and defense of Hazbin Hotel, as well as its creator VivziePop, who has been a prominent and controversial figure for nearly a decade now. And understanding how hate towards her functions on a grander scale is important to understanding why some people are so weird towards this pilot. You know, because it was a glorified 11-minute long trailer that was, like, pretty good, all things considered. Yeah, if you were hoping for this to be a giant pilot roast, sorry. Wait, no, don't go. Quick, let me, VivziePop. I'll talk more about VivziePop. I fear if I get into the whys and hows of VivziePop hate right off the bat, I will scare off a sizable portion of this audience, especially if I start throwing around the M word willy-nilly. I swear to God, that Hazbin video attracted weirdo conservatives like flies to honey. Like every mean comment was someone trying to reverse engineer how their hate of Vivzie was somehow not rooted in the M word, and also I'm a stupid cringe liberal. Great. I'm not ready to relitigate all of that. Watch the Hazbin video. It's good. There were a lot of people throwing around very weird points about how VivziePop was going to ruin Homestuck with this pilot. Now, if you have more than 2 brain cells to rub together and you were also listening to me when I mentioned the creators of this show, you would know that she wasn't really in a position to be ruining this pilot anyway. She was an executive producer on the show, not receiving any other credit. I looked multiple times. Now, The role of executive producer can change depending on the person and how involved they wish to be. Sometimes, executive producers, particularly in television, want to be hands-on and work directly with the crew. Sometimes they are hands-off, just being there as the last line of quality control and providing funding. Both are valid ways of acting as an EP, and how hands-off or hands-on an EP chooses to be does not reflect on how good of an EP they are. Sky Henwood, the aforementioned director of the pilot, went on the record on a Q&A to say definitively that Vivzie was pretty hands-off.
Well, she looks at it. She's watched all the animatics. She watches all the clips I send her and stuff. But, that's mostly it. And she'll point out if she doesn't understand something, but, it doesn't mean we change it.
Even if she was hands-on, mind you, it wouldn't have made the criticisms the pilot had received before it even dropped make any more sense. Okay, I have to relitigate the Vivzie Pop hate a little, but it'll be quick, I promise. Most bad faith criticisms aimed at the pilot, separate from the really blatant haterisms, were centered around the Vivzie Pop writing style and Vivzie Pop art style. Phrases that plague has-been discussion boards and comment sections to this day, in case you needed any convincing that the backlashes were connected. The prior refers to the way that characters tend to talk, sometimes being reduced to just swearing a lot. But those with a smidge more nuance recognize it as a very online millennial way of speaking that, yes, does involve a lot of naughty words. The latter is... Have you seen that image of John? Ostensibly the main character of Homestuck, traced over that one PNG of Alistair from Has-Been Hotel, the PNG that has become a meme all on its own? Yeah, let's unpack that. I've gone on the record saying that Vivzie Pop's art style can be an acquired taste. It's sharp, it's maximalist, and it's oh so furry. If you do not personally like it, I don't really blame you. I didn't like it at first either. That's not the take I'm seeing typically, though. In the same way that the characters tend to talk like terminally online millennials got reduced to, they sure do say the fuck word a lot, the character design criticism went from, wow, a lot of these characters use similar color palettes and are all kind of skinny, to literally all of her character designs are exactly the same. If that kind of straw manification shocks you, welcome to the internet, I guess. The art style criticism, I have a hard time even wrapping my head around. It's just so unserious to me. She didn't design the characters for the pilot. And once the pilot did drop, the only people complaining about how it looked still were people that didn't watch it. Besides, these characters have been drawn in every style imaginable at this point, both by the comic's many official artists as well as the gigantic fandom. They could have come out looking any which way and there would have been precedents for it. The language criticism? Well, for that one, I gotta thank you guys, because now I can walk into any comment section and immediately identify all the people who don't even know the first motherfucking thing about Homestuck. Then, there's the drama with protecting Toby Fox from working with his real-life friend, Andrew Hussey, protecting both of them from Vivzie Pop, even though Hussey approached her apparently, and... How did we get here? I mean, I know a Homestuck cartoon would eventually happen, and that the production team would have an uphill battle ahead of them for numerous reasons. When Spindlehorse got involved, I upgraded the uphill battle to an almost certain small-scale disaster. But how did we get here? Ahem. In 1928, the Walt Disney Company released Steamboat Will... Wait. In 1960, J.C.R. Licklider proposed an intercomputer network, arguably... No. April 13th, 2009, 3:21 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Andrew Hussey uploads the first page of a comic named Homestuck. Okay, this is your final spoiler reminder. I take pride in making videos that aren't just SparkNote summaries, but I'm going to have to discuss and describe large swaths of the plot if this is to make any sense. While I'd prefer it if everyone read Homestuck before watching this video, that's a bigger ask than just telling you to watch a handful of movies or even a season or two of anime. It's long. Still, I can't promise that this will make perfect sense to those that aren't familiar, and I will be spoiling some pretty cool twists and turns that you deserve to go into blind, so consider yourself warned. And if you do decide to go that route, may I recommend the book club streams me and Quixby did for a point-by-point review. But if you're ready, let's take some time to talk about the comic that ruined my and all of our lives. So, that book club, right? Fun fact, Quixby is actually a long-time friend of mine, like, long time. I'm talking elementary school, but despite being very terminally online people, even from that point, our fandoms rarely intersected. Like, while I was getting really into anime and a few Tumblr favorites like Super Hulock, she was diving headfirst into the Zelda series and treating shiny hunting like a pro sport. The two sides of the hates wool and is a picky eater coin, truly. I didn't even think to introduce her to Homestuck when I was first introduced to it by our mutual friend. Let's call her Amelia. But there are some layered reasons to that. Fun fact. Amelia was my introduction to a lot of my longtime fandoms. It's through her that I learned what Hetalia was, for example. I went to some of my first anime conventions with her, and first cosplayed in public with her. While I can't say she's literally the reason I'm into anime, I still place that blame firmly on Pokemon and Sailor Moon piracy sites I came across at age 10, it's a pretty near thing, as it was through her that I learned about a few shoujo classics that I still hold near and dear to my heart, like Ouran High School Host Club and Fruits Basket. A funny aside, her favorite characters in both Hetalia and Fruits Basket were Russia and Kyo, respectively, both of who were voiced by Jerry Jewell in the Funimation dubs. Yes, we were dub casuals, we were like 12, get over it. And she was relatively self-aware of the fact that she mostly liked Kyo because he had the same voice actor, and Russia was just her all-time fave little guy. While more of a Yuki girly nowadays, I liked Kyo too, but she basically claimed that I wasn't allowed to have him be my favorite because she picked him first. I didn't, listen, but yeah, we were kind of weird kids. What can I say? Okay, let's circle back. Homestuck's first page was published in 2009 when I was literally 9. I was still probably sucking my thumb and watching Barney at that point. I'm not around kids much. I assume that's what 9-year-olds are like. It wasn't until around 2012, pretty late in the Homestuck story, all things considered, that Amelia told me about it. Her favorite character being Aridin, if you're curious. Now, by this point, I fully trust her recommendations. So I boot up the comic and immediately get in trouble with my parents about it.
Hey, so what sort of insane loot did you rake in today?
I got a little Monsters poster. It's so awesome. I'm going to watch it again today. The apple juice scene was so funny.
Oh hell, that is such a coincidence. I just found an unopened container of apple juice in my closet. It is like fucking Christmas up in here.
I am very open about having grown up with unmonitored internet access and the mixed effects that's had on me as a person. This is the one time to my memory that my father has ever decided to snoop on me while watching or reading anything. He takes offense to the naughty word that Dave messages here.
It is like fucking Christmas up in here.
Honestly, this has become a core memory for me. Imagine my shame, my horror, as my conservative father finds out that I, a 12-year-old girl, am reading a comic with the F word in it. I even read it out loud, all in a huff. And what's worse, I was on his computer, so I kind of felt bad about it. Even if I had seen way worse stuff at that point, he didn't even know about all the messed up YouTube videos I'd seen. The ones with blood in them. He made me close the browser though and wouldn't leave until I turned on an episode of How to Train Your Dragon: Riders of Berk. Eventually, my internet access would go right back to being unmonitored, as God intended, when not even 2 years later, I would get a laptop to celebrate me going to high school. All bets were off when I was allowed to surf the web in the privacy of my room, and any suspicious material could be hidden by simply closing the device. I used that time to mostly pirate more anime. I got into shonen anime like Tsubasa Reservoir Chronicle and D. Gray Man, as well as Italian shoujo classic Winx Club. Perhaps because of that earlier trauma, Homestuck remained uncaught up with for several years. Or maybe it just remained that way because it was really fucking long and kinda slow. Honestly, I probably read those first 4 acts like a dozen times. Don't get me wrong, the early acts of Homestuck are good. Really good, in my opinion, and I grow more affection for them with every reread. But it's slow. It's really slow, and most people I know of who have tried to get into Homestuck find it to be something of a barrier. The first 4 acts of Homestuck constitute the first 1,988 pages of the comic, out of a little over 8,000. That's not so bad when you realize that a lot of the pages are just single images, and that compared to the rest of the comic, this section is especially word light. Shout out to actspages.net, a website that keeps all the page counts and word counts well documented. According to their website, and doing a bit of math, the word counts of acts 1 through 4, including in-image and flash text, is 126,879 words. That's less than Act 5, Act 2 alone. Hussey got cute with the naming conventions. Think of it like Act 5.2, aka only one subsection of one act, which has a word count of 179,648. Of course, unless you spend an ungodly amount of time on AO3, those two numbers probably just registered as real fucking big. And they are. But if you do spend a bit too much time on AO3, you'd realize that 120,000 words isn't such a big deal. That's less than any one Lord of the Rings book, save for The Hobbit. A sizable tome, for sure, but not the end of the world. A determined reader could slam it in a day. I think, and this is me going off the conversations I had with Quixby in the book club, that it's not the word count itself that repels new readers so much as it is what's accomplished with that word count. Or rather, what isn't accomplished. Homestuck's first few acts are so slow and plodding, so self-indulgent in all of its little inane jokes and side quests that it makes my writing seem concise and pithy. In what is nearly an entire Silmarillion's worth of words, not as much as accomplished as you'd really like. And the plot hardly gets going at all until you reach Act 4, which is 1,358 pages in. Acts 1 through 3 basically act as the world's longest prologue, setting up the characters and relationships and getting you used to some of the weirder systems this world works off of. Systems that the comic rarely stops to explain. This includes the big, sweeping concepts like the casual time travel and alternate universes and timelines that gets explored pretty well in the Midnight Crew intermission, but it also includes some of the more day-to-day stuff. Homestuck essentially works off video game logic, but all the normal gamey words you'd come to expect, inventory, combat, equipped weapon, are replaced with SAT words, Sylladex, Strife, and Strife Specibus. Characters don't level up, they go up a rung on the echelon. They don't just gain money for killing enemies, they gain grist and boon dollars, which are put into their ceramic pork hollow. If you see how Hussey talks in forum posts and regular emails, you start to realize that Homestuck's long-winded SAT word-written style of writing is just kind of the way they talk. Couldn't relate. That's not even mentioning how intentionally overcomplicated some of these systems are made to be. The Sylladex isn't just a normal inventory. There are fetch modus that the characters have to equip that change the way they're allowed to retrieve items. And sometimes even the characters themselves have a hard time remembering or making sense of these fetch modus, causing hilarity to ensue, usually. Fun fact, I have been running a Homestuck homebrew campaign these last few months, using the heavily modified skeleton of Dungeons & Dragons 5e. I will provide a copy of the 100-page PDF document detailing the rules in the description in case anyone wants to give it a go, provided none of you hassle me about the typos since I wrote it in a 3-day fugue state. In order to make Homestuck actually playable, even for a group that were pretty familiar with the comic, I had to do a lot of simplification, combining grist and boon dollars into one currency, making the inventory system more conventional, way condensing the echelon. Homestuck systems do not make sense from a gaming perspective. And considering that Hussey was a programmer before they took to writing webcomics, I think that was intentional. That's only half of the battle. I mean, strife of Acts 1 through 3, though. I mentioned the characters, and so long as I'm here, now is as good a time as any to explain what Homestuck is about. Oh, yeah, You know what? Characters. We can start? from there.
A young man stands in his bedroom. It just so happens that today, the 13th of April 2009, is this young man's birthday. Though it was only 13 years ago he was given life, it is only today he will be given a name. What will the name of this young man be?
It's John Egbert's birthday, and he wants to play a video game with his internet friends. For a long while, you know of these friends through their chat handles alone. The character's using a chat service called Pester Chum, reminiscent of AOL Instant Messenger, a reference so old that a sizable portion of the people watching this video may have never heard of it. These pester logs are the dialogue of the comic. They make up the vast majority of the text to deliver the story and are also a bit of a hurdle at first. This isn't tightly written, not one word wasted dialogue. These are the chat logs of 13-year-olds. Written like the chat logs of 13-year-olds, or at least a middle-aged man's best approximation of them. They have stupid jokes, some slurs, words that really wouldn't fly nowadays.
The hell bees shot, you fucking really can't say that word anymore.
These kids bother each other with inane shit as much or more than they do the main plot. This results in these acts being a bit of a slog if you aren't immediately charmed by these guys. I know a decent amount of people that ended up skipping the chat logs because they assumed they weren't necessary, or just skipping to Act 5. We'll get to Act 5. We will get to Act 5. But for now, who are these guys? I mentioned John.
Alright, wish me luck. Oh, BTW, JK, I was wearing a funny disguise this whole time. Gotcha.
A kind of nerdy everyman who likes Ghostbusters, shitty B movies, and fancies himself a bit of a prankster. He's a sweet kid, if a bit of a blank slate, and while, like I said, hardly any of the game systems are explained, to clarify, these systems are present for the entire comic, not just when they start playing the video game. He's just clueless enough that him struggling through it gives you an extra second to find your footing. There's Dave Strider.
I'm wearing them ironically, because they're awesome. The fact that they're ironic makes them awesome. And vice versa. Are you taking notes on how to be cool? Jesus, get a fucking pen.
An irony-poisoned white rapper from Texas, but like the city part of Texas, who likes music, collecting dead things, is this party's resident programmer. He also lives with his very eccentric older brother, only referred to as Bro, who of all things seems to make absurd amounts of money running a puppet, let's say not safe for work site? A Smuppet site, if you will. Bro is also obsessed with training. At some point, each kid gets a combat encounter with their guardian, and Dave is the only one who unequivocally gets his ass kicked. Bro seems to be the only one who takes the encounter seriously at all, really. John's encounter with his father comes across more like, well, not really a fight, so much as John trying to dodge his kind of overbearing father who wants to give him his birthday cake. It's more leave me alone, dad, than it is actual combat encounter. Still, it's all through the filter of video game abstraction. The tone remains silly. Unless you're an adult reader overanalyzing things, you probably won't find anything wrong with Dave's situation. Foreshadowing is a literary device. Rose Lalonde is our resident goth girl.
What were you doing with it in the first place? I'm not sensing a lot of regard for the personal property of others. Is this how your pent-up frustration with your father manifests itself?
And was my personal favorite during my first ever read-through as a kid. She likes long words, reads this world's equivalent of H.P. Lovecraft, writes shitty wizard fanfiction, something that I thought was deeply silly and not very realistic until I watched The Mighty Nine. She also fancies herself a junior therapist and likes to psychoanalyze her friends with mixed results. She's clearly someone who values her own intelligence very highly, and like Dave, has a slightly more complicated relationship with her mother, who is shown to have some substance abuse problems. A mother who, if you read through the lines, isn't bad, but the two clearly don't know how to really talk to each other. Saving the weirdest for last, we have Jade Harley. And I do mean weird. John lives in a normal suburb, Dave lives in a normal high-rise apartment, Rose lives in a kind of isolated lab upstate, and yeah, that's a little strange, but Jade?
Well, it sounds really crazy and kind of scary, but it also sounds kind of exciting. I don't know, John. Maybe this is your destiny. If If anyone can save the world, I think it's probably you.
Is by all appearances the only resident of a giant lab facility on a tiny volcanic island. Her house has multiple floors, but rather than stairs, there are transportalizers, teleportation pads that beam her up and down the facility. She has special boxes that can instantly freeze and heat objects to the point of irradiation. A robot that moves around for her when she's asleep, and oh yeah, her guardian is a white dog with godlike powers and a nuclear theme. His name is Becquerel. Yeah, a bit of a jump. Jade likes gardening, claims to not be a furry, but is definitely a furry, is narcoleptic and has a habit of knowing things that she shouldn't. If you go back and reread the comic a second time, that last bit becomes all the more obvious. That's our starting cast, and honestly, not bad. A 4-man band of 4 nerdy kids who are nerdy in different ways, and I'm not talking Steve Urkel nerdy. This is the genuine, authentic article. To me, it's very notable that before we even know what kind of people these characters are, we're told what their special interests are.
Your name is John. As was previously mentioned, it is your birthday. A number of cakes are scattered about your room. You have a variety of interest. You have a passion for really terrible movies. You like to program computers, but you are not very good at it. You have a fondness for paranormal lore, and are an aspiring amateur magician. You also like to play games sometimes. What will you do?
This isn't something that I see a lot in anything, really. Usually authors aren't that concerned with what hobbies their characters have unless it becomes relevant later on. To prioritize this, to have these interests define the characters, is honestly a really autistic, for lack of better word, thing to do. Affectionate. Anyway, 4 autistic children want to play a game together. Wow, that sounds like the setup to a shockingly offensive joke. John, Dave, Rose, and Jade want to play a game together called Spurb. What exactly this game is not made clear at first. When they first boot it up, it most resembles The Sims, but your friend is the Sim. The game gives them the power to directly affect the environment of their client player's house, and they don't seem to think this is too strange, outside of the damage and hijinks this initially causes. What is strange is when John, the first player to log in, realizes there's a meteor heading straight for his house. And he doesn't seem to be the only one. The plot finally kicks in as the kids put together that this game may be more than a very immersive Sims-like, that it may have, in fact, caused the apocalypse if Rose's analysis is to be trusted.
Since you are reading this, chances are you have installed this game on your computer already. If this is true, like many others, you have just participated in bringing about the end of the world. My condolences.
Either way, being 4 average teenagers and not the Avengers, there's not much they can do about it. The only way out is through, into the game. Yep, it's an isekai. My How to Train Your Dragon video was foreshadowing, actually. John escapes his fiery fate and finds his way inside the game. First in what seems to be a black void where he's bombarded by monsters called imps, and eventually down on a strange alien planet called the Land of Wind and Shade. A planet that he seems to have deep ties to, intertwined destinies with, even. Despite never having been there before. The planets act as the quest hubs for each player character, all 4 of the kids having their own, with some kind of problem or puzzle that they need to work out in order to proceed and level up. There's also this war going on in the background on this planet that all the others orbit called Skya, with these chess piece people, and each kid has a guide called a Colonel Sprite, and John's is his dead grandmother, and... See, this is why the plot of Homestuck can be hard to talk about. It's so convoluted it makes Kingdom Hearts look tame. It's so dense that if you read it and don't really understand most or any of the sci-fi bullshit, I don't really blame you. It's a series that requires a wiki to fully understand, and thankfully it does have an above-average wiki. I'd like to say that the sci-fi bullshit isn't actually important, and that it's all about the interpersonal drama anyway, but in this case, I'm not sure that that is the case. The interpersonal drama is important. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that's why the majority of fans are here. The deep lore isn't unimportant, though. And enough text is dedicated to detailing it to a kind of insane extent that it's clear that the author does care a good deal about that aspect of the story. I mostly don't. I learned a good deal of the lore against my will when making the homebrew campaign. I can be a little obsessive around the lore surrounding a certain group of aliens. For the most part, though, I have nothing interesting to say about the greater lore, and without shame, I will admit that certain parts of the story still go over my head. So I'm gonna stick to the minimum where that's concerned, for the most part. More interesting than the lore, anyway, is the way that the comic chooses to deliver the story when John touches down on the planet. I alluded to it earlier, but Homestuck heavily features Flash animations, the now defunct program. This is why it was inaccessible for so long, and while there were some unofficial channels you could go through to get something approaching the original experience, the website it was hosted on, mspaintadventures.com, later renamed Homestuck.com right around the time What Pumpkin, Andrew Hussey's production studio, started partnering with Viz Media. Yeah, that website was broken. Like, completely broken for a long span of time. And it just kept getting worse as their attempts to future-proof the comic became more and more half-assed. Big, memorable Flash animations became embedded YouTube videos, and interactive sections became slideshows. The site was recently fixed, finally, but shit was dire for like nearly a decade. I reread it using the unofficial Homestuck collection, a fan-made restoration project that recently got a cease and desist from Homestuck team, so that's fun. Oh, yeah, that's why I went on that tangent. Not the legal stuff, we'll get to that. There were interactive Flash games. There were smaller ones before that point. Cute interactive music sections with Dave and Jade in which you can make some dumb little tunes on their mixer and flute respectively, as well as before-mentioned scripted combat encounters, some being quite elaborate. S Act 4 is a giant Flash game with roaming enemies, NPCs, puzzles, combat. It's a whole-ass game. You could probably spend a good half hour on it if you wanted to explore absolutely everything. See, this is the other reason why a plot discussion of Homestuck is kind of pointless. It's only a fraction of the picture at the end of the day. Writing-wise, Homestuck is out there. That's apparent from the word go, but the reason there will never be another Homestuck is the truly bizarre things it does with its website format. Calling it a webcomic feels insufficient sometimes. Fun fact, Quixby kept calling it a game in our streams, and I didn't blame her, even if I made fun of her for it a bit. Webcomics don't normally have embedded animations, giant soundtracks, and Flash games. Or if they do, they're extra material meant to be sought out by the true fans and freaks. In Homestuck, these things are load-bearing. When I say I have not seen another piece of media quite like Homestuck before or since, I mean it. It is an incredibly unique piece from the ground up, a multimedia monster, the brainchild of one very odd person. And really, we haven't even scratched the surface yet. Unlike all of my videos, I'll get some comment to the effect of, "Oh, I love your Toxona. Oh, I love your avatar." Not realizing that I do actually custom make these for every video in some vain attempt to separate myself from other Toxona YouTubers, since I frankly don't like most of these guys. No drama. I mean, if you happen to be one of those and you're watching this, I don't mean you, obviously, but vanishingly few of them have any interest in actually intelligent analysis or review. Even and especially some of the big names. Cartoon YouTubers like Saberspark do fulfill a function in providing simple recommendations and turning people onto niche projects or interesting stories that they may not have heard before. I, on the other hand, enjoy using my art and English degrees to... Anyway, I drew myself as a troll today. She's a fuchsia blood. I'll accept no constructive criticism. If you clicked on this video not knowing anything about Homestuck, just loving me personally, thank you. But you're wrong. You do know something about Homestuck. You know what a troll is. Or at least you've seen one before. In the comic, we're first introduced to them as literal internet trolls that bother John and the others through chat. But as the game kicks in and they start bothering them more, not less, despite the whole apocalypse happening, it becomes apparent that there's something weird about them. Plus, they keep saying odd shit.
I changed my Chump handle to ditch you guys. How did you find me?
Oh, ha, ha. Ha, 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 ha. This is the little word humans say repeatedly when something tickles their absurdity palate, right?
If it wasn't apparently clear, these guys are aliens, designed to vaguely resemble Howie Mandel's character from Little Monsters, a movie referenced directly in the comic multiple times. Now, if I went too deeply into their planet, culture, and theories about their anatomy, I would see a sizable drop in viewer retention. So I'll stick to bullet points. Think of them like gray Klingons, with a culture that believes in survival of the fittest, as well as might makes right to the point of being pretty eugenicsy about it. They're good at war, good at fighting. Some of them have special psychic abilities or are just really strong and resilient for some reason. They also have a hemospectrum, with blood denoting your caste in society. Blue bloods are literal aristocracy, and the Empress, they have an Empress, is a fuchsia blood. That is the footnotes version of it, I promise. I didn't even mention the tragedy of Troll Jesus. I showed restraint. Anyway, these guys set the internet on fire. People who read this comic tend to like the human kids just fine, but they love the trolls. Everyone has a favorite troll. Why is honestly not rocket science. Aliens are cool, for one. For two, they're written in a very different way, and I'm not referring to their typing quirks. The trolls are written in a way that's so cartoony and over-exaggerated that they make the humans seem grounded and realistic by comparison. They have big personalities, big presences, and even bigger drama behind them. They initially were written as meta-jokes, basically. Each of them is a different kind of person you would find on the internet made flesh. You have the Rager.
Fuck you. Fuck you for me just reading that.
The one so deadpan they might as well be dead.
No. Oh yes. Yes, there's nothing. And no, you can't.
The Doormat.
I don't mean to be rude or boring, but that's ridiculous given, the circumstances.
The Gamer who should probably be on antidepressants.
Fuck that. Just watch. This bit is dusted. Check me out. All dusted it like a saucy fucking maid.
The Furry Role Player.
AC pauses and looks up with a little bit of chagrin. I forgot I have to talk to someone else about this. I have been procrastinating.
The one who has perfect grammar for some reason and is always managing everyone else.
Yeah, she's just a concerned Moira. Looking out for you, that's all.
The Elite Speaker.
Blar, that's so stupid. He's not the boss of you.
The Massive Bitch.
Slow down. Man, I am just wearing out so many pens taking all these important notes. Fuck you for ruining all my good note-taking pens and giving me this terrible cramp in my good note-taking hand.
The one who is far too horny.
Yes. Oh, so good. I am presently whipped into a state of contrition, one befitting of our class disparity, and I am starting to perspire again, so it's best that we stop.
The Stoner.
Alright, I'll try to get in and get up on my chill real soon and we can play.
The Incel.
Are you sure you aren't being hasty about this? You have just been through a lot. I mean, well, we are supposed to be fated to be Moirails, aren't we? Isn't that how it works? You can't just throw all that away because you're sick of me.
And the far too excitable girl who probably has ADHD or something, aka Horse Girl Marine Animal Variant.
Everything we are about to do next is exciting. It is always exciting. I'm excited. Phew.
Yeah, there's 12 of them. One for each zodiac sign. Won't be for long, but you know. Act 5 is their proper introduction. We find out that they played their own session some time ago and have been trapped in the game ever since, due to some unusual circumstances. This act, we, from the beginning, track their journey, as well as find out more generally what their deals are. The first thing you realize is that these guys all have some kind of beef with each other. Like, there was an incident some time ago that resulted in several of them being permanently injured and one of them dying, and none of those involved seem very keen on letting it go. The rest of them are friends, but not in a way I would call typical. They argue a lot and yell at each other even more. You start to wonder if any of them even like each other, but as you read along, you realize that they're just kind of like that. So, you have 12 overdramatic attention hogs, all crying and yelling and plotting against each other. And I'm not going to sit here, arms crossed, pretending like the trolls are lame and actually I liked Homestuck before they came around. I was inducted into this fandom by someone who was an Aridin stan. My favorite character is Carcat. My favorite ship is Dave Cat. I am not above glazing Act 5. And why should I be above it? It's just good. It's good interpersonal drama. Hussey feels like they hit their stride with character writing. And while not always super nuanced, each character is certainly multifaceted and following their story is rewarding. And it goes without saying, I wasn't the only one who thought so. Fan art and fanfiction regarding the trolls takes up the vast majority of Homestuck fan-made content, and cosplay of them was so common, stories surrounding these cosplays have become kind of infamous, even putting aside the true horror stories like the Sharpie bathtub. That gray body paint stained many a convention hall back in the day. If your local con has a ban on body paint, it's probably Homestuck's fault. Heck, I'm pretty sure the body paint issue is why the Steven Universe fandom created the arm sock method back in the day. Ex-Homestuckers knew. Interestingly, I never did a proper troll cosplay, but I'm considering trying now that I'm an adult with no money, damn it. As a teen, I got like halfway to doing a troll cosplay twice. Once for Terezi, the lead speaker, and another time for Mina, a troll who isn't actually introduced this act. Honestly, I didn't do a lot of Homestuck fandom things back in the day. I didn't really have a troll sona, I didn't draw fan art, I didn't write fanfiction. I didn't really talk about it to other people, as the girl in my junior high, Amelia, that got me into it, ended up not going to the same high school as me. I really haven't spoken to her at all since that split. I'm not sure why I never did these things. Why I don't feel that same connection to Homestuck the way I do to other media I've discussed here. Despite it also being with me for about as long, despite having put in no small amount of effort to get into it. I've certainly read a lot of Homestuck fanfiction. I have a decent amount of fan art saved on my phone. I've read it multiple times at this point. I love Homestuck. I love the trolls. Or at least I feel like I should. Being in fandom in your mid-20s is kind of funny. I don't feel entirely out of step with modern fandom, maybe half a step behind. I was a pretty slow adopter of TikTok, and let's be real, that app's days are already kind of numbered. I was getting into anime just as the switch from DVDs to streaming happened, but mentally I still idolized the idea of having a robust DVD collection. That to me is what a real fan looks like. People younger than me would mark me as an old head for that, even though I associate that title with more the VHS and bootleg era. I'm just old enough to know how to pirate anime, and no, I won't teach you how. When I was young, I had to use the fuck around and find out method, but you guys have mountains of resources on Reddit. You can do it. I believe in you. But at the same time, I'm young enough that I don't really view my Crunchyroll subscription as optional, even though they continue to make decisions that, in my opinion, don't have the industry's best interests in mind. I'm old enough that I feel like I was there for the height of the Homestuck fandom. I remember the Octopimp videos and the AMVs and CMVs. Like I said, I read the fanfiction. I was there when the fanfiction.net NSFW purge created a mass exodus to Archive of Our Own, the movement led primarily by Super Hulock, the MCU, and Homestuck. I remember when Tumblr used to have NSFW content, and I know the sheer amount of Homestuck art that was lost when that website more or less went belly up. I try to save the re-uploads when I can find them. But to say that I was there at the height of the fandom is just not true. I didn't even start reading it until the height had come and gone, that very first attempt in 2012. At this point, Act 6, for all intents and purposes the final act, was well underway. Though in all fairness, Act 6 does comprise of about half the comic and 5 years of IRL time. The comic only ran for 7 years, by the way. At this point in the story, the kids we've been following, trolls and humans alike, are at the end of their rope. Their enemies are insurmountable and their sessions unwinnable. They needed a do-over, and Spurb would provide in the form of a scratch. This allowed for a reboot of the universe, a complete redo with another brand new set of player characters, all being remixed versions of characters we were already at least tangentially aware of. And this technically wouldn't be the first time this happened in the comic. I mean, you should be used to the idea of alternate versions of characters and alternate timelines by this point. In this section, we also find out that our troll players are actually post-scratch, meaning that their session is the result of someone else's fucking up so bad and having to redo. But, unlike our human heroes who have plans to escape the destruction that a scratch normally causes, the trolls' predecessors are dead, existing in the comic as ghosts. This means that the first half of Act 6 introduces 16 new characters, 4 humans and another 12 whole trolls. This act is where they started to lose people a bit, and if you've ever read something else with this kind of giant cast, then you'd know why. There is no way to have a cast that big and not lose something in the shuffle, whether it be certain characters getting pushed to the wayside or others just ending up paper thin. Homestuck despite its best efforts, ended up doing both, but that's a discussion for later. The solution the comic attempts is to quarantine all but a few of the most important of the Trolls' ancestors, a portmanteau of descendant and ancestor, into a few Flash games, making them the closest thing the comic has to optional content. Granted, I probably made a few Dancester stans mad with that one because, like the other Trolls, they are very popular. You know how the main Trolls are all riffs on certain online personalities? These guys take that to the level of parody. They have a social justice warrior, a gamer girl, and a literal 4chaner. They have interesting designs, easy to grasp traits, and I'm going to be honest, I don't get it this time. Save for the ones that actually do remain important, Arania, Mina, and yeah, that's it actually. Most of these alternate Trolls are written to be unlikable. They range from actively harmful stereotypes to worst person you've ever met in your life. And I often find myself annoyed by how the fandom tends to treat them. Like, it's relatively obvious that a lot of you guys didn't, read this section.
What? No, come on, guy. I'm just giving you a friendly little shoulder massage with one hand, like this. See? In a way that seems very casual, like bros do. Please don't make this more awkward than it needs to be.
I'm sorry.
I forgive you. Now, hold that thought. I'm going to see if I can catch up with Mina. Don't follow me, because obviously you're going to cramp my style.
Cronus Ampera is my least favorite character in Homestuck, and it's not close. I jokingly called Aridin an incel earlier, though I do stand by it, honestly. Cronus is somehow worse. He is a sex pest who makes everyone around him actively uncomfortable, who is implied to be abusing Matuna in some manner. I promise the quote I pulled is absolutely not the worst one I could have. Now, because I'm afraid some people are going to take what I say out of context, let me clarify some things. I'm not saying no one is allowed to like Cronus as a character. I'm not saying that Cronus is poorly written, quite the opposite, in fact. He's far too realistic a depiction of a certain type of man, in my opinion. I guess what I'm saying is that I'm a bit concerned. How many people seem to be taking this character who is, let's just be transparent, probably a rapist, out of context and making ooh TikTok edits about him. I am a has-been hotel defender. A lover of the Angel Dust episode and musical number Poison, and even I think some of this is uncomfortable. The thing is, I don't really blame the people who make these edits or fan arts, which is why I'm not showing them here. I think how Cronus tends to get treated by the fandom is just indicative of the kind of space the fandom was at the time, because I literally actually think that some of the people drawing this stuff and participating in this fandom weren't reading the comic, or at least weren't reading very closely. You have to understand how big and inescapable this fandom was at the time, how much of your feed on Tumblr was just Homestuck, Homestuck, Homestuck. Archive of Our Own became what it is today, at least partially because of so many writers going there to write Homestuck smut, something fanfiction.net was really cracking down on at the time, as I said earlier. The characters had broken containment, and people were seeing these guys maybe not even being aware that there was a comic behind it. The Dancestors having thin or even terrible personalities didn't really matter, because the designs were pretty consistently cool. So you would have outsiders seeing this cool greaser alien guy. They may get like a watered down bullet point list of his personality and start drawing him, unaware of the fact that this probably isn't the kind of character you want to be making your whole personality. And if they did even read Homestuck, they might not see his dialogue at all. Again, it being relegated to a very skippable Flash section. Those Dancester flashes were long, and they were sometimes pretty difficult to navigate without a guide, so unless you have someone telling you or are a very dedicated reader, you may not get Cronus's most important moment, when the mask is off and we see how horrific his behavior can really get, especially since he's careful to act at least his version of nice to those he thinks can fight back, something that is also, sadly, very realistic. And again, I'm not against a character like this on principle. I think it's actually really interesting that he exists as he does in the comic, in the same way that I find Valentino's sometimes chillingly realistic depiction interesting. And if more people liked him, or at least were fascinated by him for these reasons, I think I would respect the fandom behind him a bit more. The Homestuck fandom was big, unruly, problematic, and likely the reason your local con implemented a bunch of new rules from about 2013 to 2016. Not just the body paint thing, I promise. The characters had become mimetic. And this is where it started to hit critical mass and popularity. Though, technically, that thing where Homestuck managed to break 3 separate websites, Mega Drive, Newgrounds, and MS Paint Adventures all in one fell Flash animation happened like right before this. Literally only a few pages before with S Cascade back at the end of Act 5. There were also, and I'm sure you've noticed me dancing around it a bit, the New Human Kids, all with their own interpersonal dramas. There's Jane Crocker, yes, like the real-life cake mix brand.
The Batter Witch does not exist. It is an idiotic urban legend. How many times have I explained this? My great-great-grandmother, who founded the company and is accused of holding this identity, would have to be almost 200 years old if she were still alive today. The idea is such preposterous hogwash, it's hardly worth dignifying with a rational response.
The young version of John's grandmother, heiress to a rather suspicious and very plot-important baking empire and handsome detective enthusiast. There's Roxy Lalonde.
Well, shit, Jane. What am I even supposed to do? I can't hit on anybody, and apparently, I can entertain nary a frisky thought about anybody, because apparently, everybody's off limits.
The young version of Rose's mom, a cheerful girl who, like her older counterpart, has issues with abusing alcohol, though she's working on it. More than working on it, really. Her efforts to get and stay sober constitute one of the more interesting background arcs in the comic. She also really likes wizards, and in general is the absolute best. Jake English, yes, like the other character that we haven't gotten to yet.
It has just been absolutely bully having a stand-up gent like you in my corner. Just a grade A dude who's a cut above the others in class and camaraderie. Phew, gropes for a fresh kerchief. I hope this shit isn't coming across as platitudinous. I really mean it.
Young version of Jade's grandfather, who didn't get mentioned because he's dead before comics start and not very important, is a bit of a himbo. He likes shitty movies, talks like a British teen from the 1920s. He's the nexus of a slightly stupid love triangle and one half of one of the comic's most popular ships. He later is heavily implied to be aromantic or possibly aro-ace, and like everyone in the fandom ignores this about him. As an ace person, that doesn't make me terribly happy, honestly, but I'm not the most attached to him as a character anyway, so I don't care that much. Dirk Strider is the shadow leader / puppet master of the group, his words, not mine.
If it puts your mind at ease, I'll be the one pulling the strings here. I will be the unseen hand whose nimble digits are behind every subtle twitch in our session bulbous foam ass. At least those gyrations not happening by the volition of its own quivering absorbent proboscis.
As well as the young version of Bro Strider. He doesn't know how to people very well, and while technically less irony poisoned than Dave, he's just as closed off and inscrutable. He's the other half of that popular ship, a ship that is actually canon for a time. Dirk essentially lightly manipulates Jake into entering a relationship with him near the start of Act 6, something that is both not as fucked up and just as fucked up as it sounds. It mostly just reads as realistic teenage romance fumbling, and it falls apart in almost the exact way you'd expect it to, with Dirk acting far too clingy and desperate, and Jake's arrow ass evading without having the courage to actually say anything because he's still mid-figuring himself out. Of course, a good amount of the fandom just kind of saw it and said, ooh, canon yaoi, and didn't think too hard about why this relationship almost certainly wouldn't work out, because most of them were teenagers themselves who didn't recognize the red flags for what they were. They probably had yet to make these mistakes themselves. The entirety of Act 6 is pretty meta, and a good portion of the theming is concerned with the internet as a whole, commenting on the Homestuck comic and fandom, as well as discussing, oftentimes in plain terms by the characters, the nature of storytelling as well as their roles in this world. This part of the story, the first half of Act 6, it's done well enough. That will not be the case through the end, but we'll get there when we get there. That's why the Dancestors are even more blatant parodies of terminally online people, for example. Important to this are also, I'm so sorry, another 2 characters I forgot to mention. Calliope and Caliborn are aliens, and despite some red herring clues to the contrary, they're not trolls. They're a species called cherubs. They're brother and sister. Or the closest thing cherubs have to brother and sister. See, they share a body, one consciousness taking over when the other falls asleep, and as part of their coming of age, one has to predominate the other. You have the sweet and sensitive Calliope,
I'm so pleased to hear you're leaning in favor of participating with the rest of us. I promise we'll all have a ball together. Now, I have a busy schedule to keep up with, so I must go. But please remember, if you can always contact me. If you have any questions, of course. Don't be a stranger, love.
Who dispenses a lot of the late comic exposition. She's an artist, has a fondness for trolls, and is rather self-conscious about her appearance. She is immediately one of the sweetest characters in all of Homestuck, and you know from relatively early on that she is doomed. She also speaks in narrative terms at times.
With all these spoilers by their nature, the more time that passes for you, the less relevant it becomes to guard this secrecy.
Mentioning causal spoilers, theorizing about events in the story past and future, referring to her internet friends as her all-time favorite characters, and literally making fan art of them. Her brother Caliborn is everything she is not.
Well, the night is still young, so who knows? But nah, I was just dropping by again to say how I'm gonna kill you, that's all. And this is just assuming you don't all die before I get the chance to puzzle murder you, on account of you being a bunch of hideous fuck-ups.
He is a cruel and callous child, and the child part of that is not insignificant. He acts and speaks in ways that make it very clear he is a deeply immature person, and while at times it is endearing, that doesn't make him any less of a threat, especially considering his main initial goal is to murder his sister. Especially considering you are very certain from early on that he is the younger version of the comic's main villain and existential threat, Lord English. He also really likes quoting Saw and has a puppet aesthetic that is only significant if you've read the comic and understand the connection that I don't have time to explain. Again, read the comic. Maybe most significant, aside from his sick-ass DeviantArt page that is still up time of recording, is the fact that he's a huge misogynist, is just blatantly rude to all of the female characters, bullying them actively. And oh, yeah, wants to kill his sister and succeeds. Putting aside how dark these two characters are when you think about them for more than a second, these are Homestuck fans, right? Calliope is like everything that can be good about being a fan of something. Theorizing, creation of fan work, forming of community. She has a troll sona, she cosplays, and she possesses an encyclopedic knowledge of the world and systems. Caliborn is, on the other hand, the worst kind of fan you know. Deeply misogynistic and unintelligent, incapable of creation or adding to the conversation in any meaningful way. He talks like an edgy 12-year-old, bullies those around him, and does everything he can to drag them down to his level. And of course, what is Lord English but his way overpowered OC come to life? In case it's not very obvious, this, the first half of Act 6, is when Homestuck goes from good comic that is doing interesting things artistically to something worthy of actual literary analysis. In my opinion, anyway. Some people think that this is where Homestuck went downhill, and I disagree, honestly. Or at least I'm of the opinion that it might be things surrounding this section of the story that are making them feel that way, particularly the Kickstarter. Now, in a previous draft, I was originally going to say, check out the Sarah Zed video, I don't got time for all that. However, I actually decided to take the time recently to read through one of her primary sources, the one that low-key got her catching a legal threat, the GeoCities articles. If you can't tell, I'm a bit nervous. To set the stage for those who know nothing, September 2012, the Homestuck team creates a Kickstarter to fund a Homestuck adventure game, and considering Homestuck as a comic was already a send-up of adventure games, everyone liked that. They raised $2.5 million almost immediately, way overshooting their goal, and the game Hiveswap is confirmed for release. It has yet to be released in its entirety, time of recording. And before you ask, it looks like this. I played Act 1, it's fine. Reportedly, the game has had a troubled development cycle, to say the least. It basically having played musical chairs with dev teams for the first few years, and beyond that, the story tends to split. The main thing that can be agreed on is that this troubled cycle happened because the Kickstarter money kind of went poof when the game was with its first developer, The Odd Gentleman, and that they've been struggling to keep up with funding ever since. The story for the longest time, the story according to Homestuck team and What Pumpkin, though they've hesitated to say this too directly for probably legal reasons, is that The Odd Gentleman ran away with the money. The story that GeoCities presents is that it was more the fault of Hussie, not keeping up with deadlines, and Geo essentially drags Hussie over the coals over their lack of transparency and relatively shady business practices. Things like not sticking to promises for regular Kickstarter updates, not telling people about why the delays were happening until complaints reached a fever pitch, not crediting devs that otherwise would have received credit, or maybe worst of all, creating an entirely new dev team, moving them out to New York, and then firing them all with very little warning. Allegedly! Kids, if a company happens to have a suspiciously high amount of disgruntled former employees, that's not a good sign. You should probably run. Sarah Zed details some of this back and forth in a small section of her Homestuck video, and having never heard of the Streisand effect, What Pumpkin sends her a legal threat over speaking on that side of the story at all. Not wanting to receive a legal threat myself, I can't speak to what side is right, but I can absolutely recommend that you actually read the Geo articles if you haven't, especially if you were ever passively dismissive of them in the past. They are well put together and well written. Geo uses primarily publicly available information to make a very compelling case that What Pumpkin was at least not being terribly honest to their backers at pretty much every step of the way. The more anecdotal information at the latter half of the articles, the anonymous tips and interviews, while harder to verify, you should take those with a grain of salt, also haven't been directly refuted by Hussie or What Pumpkin. If anything, they've given credence to some of these claims, saying that they know exactly who probably said these things and where these claims are coming from. They just qualify that with disgruntled former employee or some other thinly veiled way of calling them a liar while confirming that, yes, they are exactly who they say they are. They've also gone out of their way to attack the characters of Geo and Sarah Zed, both of which were, at one point, huge fans of their work. That unofficial Homestuck collection, basically the only reason I was able to make this video, yeah, Geo was one of the creators on that. I'm gonna be real, this section was a lot nicer once upon a time. No, I still can't definitively say which side I'm on or what side you should be on, but I can totally state that the more I research this debacle, and the more I find out about Andrew Hussie and What Pumpkin and Homestuck team, the less I like them. And I know I'm not alone there. These are my personal opinions and my personal feelings, which I am allowed to have. Disclaimer, if you take this as permission to go harass any of these people, you are a jackass and not welcome here. So, that just happened. And we're not even done with the comic here. We still have about 2K pages remaining. And these pages are pretty universally disliked. Maybe the saddest thing about Homestuck, aside from the creators managing to completely shatter the trust of their fandom, is the fact that despite all of the interesting things the first half of Act 6 did, in my opinion, the second half would not deliver. Nothing is sadder than a good, promising work with a bad ending. Shout out to Homestuck at Tumblr for making a giant post chronicling a lot of what happened in the fandom post-2011. Like I said earlier, even though I was in the fandom at the time, I was young enough that I experienced a lot of this secondhand, so resources like this are very important. They write, between 2009 and 2012, Homestuck as a webcomic was infamous for updating daily, constantly, multiple times a day, at all hours for years. There was a calculated average that Homestuck updated 5.5 pages per day, dropping entire bundles of updates of character interaction and plot reveals frame by frame, posted as fast as Hussie could write it. 2013 and the comic majorly slows down in output, leaving these large gaps in new content that were previously not there. Now some, such as myself, used those gaps to catch up, to finally figure out what was going on with this weird comic called Homestuck. There were rumblings that it was falling off, but honestly the fandom, to me at least, felt like it was still going strong. Cosplays were still happening, fan art and fanfiction was still happening, that Kickstarter was a huge success, and I'm sure nothing bad will happen there. Ah, such innocent times. I think this is why I was never as invested in the fandom as I feel like I should have been. I slurped up any fanworks I could find with a milkshake straw, reading the comic at an embarrassingly fast pace as we raced towards the ending. I just didn't know that the end of the comic would end up being the end of the fandom, too. I mean, how could I have known? First off, in the spirit of transparency, it wasn't like the last page dropped and millions of fans just poofed off the web. This was a gradual hemorrhage, the result of the loss of Hussey's reputation thanks to the Kickstarter, people growing bored due to the increasingly long hiatuses, and other works grabbing the attention of those bored fans, particularly Steven Universe, as well as a little game, you may have heard of it, Undertale, made by Toby Fox, a personal friend of Hussey's and contributor to Homestuck. A lot of those Homestuck tracks have Toby's name on them, Megalovania even making an appearance. The readership was starting to die down. The amount of fan works being produced went from a fire hose pressure amount to more of a garden hose. And to me, the saddest thing about all this is that it was kind of deserved. Homestuck Act 6 is not very good. It's bad, honestly. It has some nice things in it, things that I appreciate in theory, if not in practice, but it is a very blatant drop-off in quality. And considering it alone took 3 years to come out when the rest of the comic took only 4, that's not great. That's not what you want to hear. Now, I know people have pointed out all the plot holes and dropped lore threads, all the little things that were set up and never picked up again. That's nerd shit. I don't care about that. I have like 3 big criticisms that I theorize all have the same source. 1, the retcon. Homestuck is no stranger to time travel and alternate universes and timelines, but during Act 6, there is a true retcon, and the way it is implemented is kind of strange, even as there are parts about it that I like. You know what? I'll start off with the good, actually. The retcon is the result of John gaining a new and unexpected power in the last section, and he not only travels through time, he travels through the comic itself. When the retcon dropped, several pages of the comic were changed to reference this, his arm in a few panels, splatters of ink that weren't there before. This is the type of meta shit that I enjoy. There were also certain password-locked pages added throughout that the comic redirected you to when you got to the relevant passwords, the unlocking of which brings you to the retcon timeline, those events being revisited with John's out-of-sequence presence. This, in my professional opinion, fucks. I just wish the lead-up to it wasn't so abrupt. The retcon happens for the reasons you'd assume. Everything went wrong and now we need to start over. But the way it went wrong was interesting, or rather, it wasn't. That was the problem. It was kind of boring. The fight in which everything goes wrong is a fight that mostly involves villains that at that point you wouldn't care about. There's Peregrine Medicant, we don't have time, and Jack Noir, we super don't have time, who haven't been a threat really since Act 5 about 3,000 pages ago, duking it out and causing chaos. Urania, a character whose villain arc was so heavily truncated and whose goals are so nonsensical it kind of feels like you skipped a few hundred pages by accident. There's Gamzee, who also hasn't been relevant since Act 5. If you're a Gamzee stan, I'm so sorry they turned your husbando into a rabid dog.
That's rough, buddy.
Then there's the brainwashed Jane and Jade. Theoretically, we should care more about this, but they're never really presented as threats. Nor is a character going through a grimdark arc a new thing for us. You're kind of just waiting for them to snap out of it. So, when a collection of C-listers and 2 characters going through a recycled arc roll up to try and defeat our heroes, you aren't really expecting them to win? Kinda? It's not that they win, honestly, more just that everyone dies through an odd series of circumstances and accidents, honestly, brainwashed characters included. In the span of what feels like too few pages, the remaining cast, save for 2 people, all die in an encounter that shouldn't have been that hard. This results in a retcon that feels unearned. The retcon should have happened at the character's lowest moment, and this moment feels contrived. It feels like this was made backwards, with the knowledge that they wanted a retcon, so might as well kill off all the characters quickly and permanently so they can have a reason for that to happen. Lazy is the word I'm looking for. This feels lazy. 2, this retcon results in basically every character arc getting dropped. Granted, this fumble was foreshadowed in many ways, Urania's botched villain arc, yes, but also, remember what I had said about Act 6 being the most meta act, the one most concerned with being self-referential, with discussing storytelling and writing directly through the characters. The second half shows us where that discussion was headed, and it's a bit of a red flag even before we see the end result. Several characters seem to have a lot to say about character arcs, their own destiny. The brainwashed Jade and Jane in particular are trying to push the heroes towards fulfilling a more traditional version of their arcs.
You're getting the chance to set right what went so horribly wrong. To atone for your hasty first attempt at frog breeding, which resulted in a terminal universe. If I were you, I would feel pretty relieved to get a second chance. But that's just me.
Though they're mostly not having it. Dave even says this when Grimbark Jade, no, I did not misspeak, tries to convince him to start time traveling again to defeat Lord English.
The Empress can suck it. I have no intention of fighting him. And this isn't even me pulling some more lame, self-aware, reluctant hero junk. I'm just straight up not going to do it.
Okay, so, subversion. If Star Wars taught me anything, it's that just because you've subverted audience expectations, it doesn't mean you've written anything clever. Here, a good comparison. You remember that art teacher that didn't want you drawing anime? Is that a relatable experience anymore? I feel like everyone on the planet has seen some kind of anime at this point. There may have been multiple reasons why they personally didn't want that, but there is a pretty good valid reason, and it's that it's in your best interest as an artist to understand anatomy and how to draw a good realistic figure before learning abstraction. You learn the rules so you can break them. It's why Pablo Picasso was such a good realistic artist, for example. The problem is, this leads some more naive beginner to intermediate artists who are starting to get good but are definitely overestimating their own abilities to assume they're ready. They may even quote, "You learn the rules so you can break them," directly to signal that they are a very smart lad who is aware of these tropes but is trying to do something different. Can you tell I'm projecting? You also, on occasion, get professionals who haven't realized how cringe that is, actually. That's how you get lines as famous as, "Themes are for 8th grade book reports" from the Game of Thrones writers. Or...
Rose, we don't have fucking arcs, we are just human beings.
This line. This line gets to me. I'm going to point out the obvious and say that they aren't human beings, these are comic characters. Now, I'm going to throw them a bone and say that no, fictional characters don't always need arcs. As someone who's read classics, who's read Hemingway and Fitzgerald and not just The Great Gatsby, someone who has a whole-ass English degree, characters don't always need arcs, or at least not in the neat and tidy traditional sense. There are certain writing styles that are geared towards realism, certain books that are more about chronicling a certain era in a character's life in which maybe the end comes and the characters don't have some satisfying ending in which it all makes sense. Maybe they don't learn anything in the end. Maybe they don't become better or worse, but just become different. A webcomic like Homestuck, in which a sizable portion of the cast are walking, talking internet tropes, is maybe not the venue for such storytelling. Not all characters need arcs, but these ones really did. In the same way that a Star Wars movie needs the hero's journey, or Game of Thrones needs themes. The retcon is the result of most of the cast dying abruptly, and then results in that cast being replaced by new versions of themselves. The text then proceeds to all but beg you to think of these guys as being the same characters as before.
That stuff all happened to you. It's just you don't have access to the memories. They didn't happen to shape this particular version of yourself, but they all played a role in helping, greater Jade grow, if that makes sense.
The problem is, of course, they're not. Homestuck has, at this point, gotten you very used to the idea of alternate selves and universes, and while some of these alternate selves are interchangeable for some minor characters, it's not so for everyone, especially, ironically, the person delivering this message. Dave Peda is a combination, a fusion, if you will, of Nepeta, a troll character, and an alternate version of Dave from a Doom timeline. One who has had a story and character arc completely distinct from the Dave we've otherwise been following for the last 8,000 pages. Fun fact, he is technically the Dave from the first few acts due to more alternate timeline shenanigans, but he hasn't been at the wheel for most of the story. A lot of his personal drama involves dealing with that feeling of being made narratively irrelevant, of not being the real Dave, though it is quite understated. A more conventional story would have done what always tends to be done with clone stories and had him have an arc in which he is able to affirm his individuality and find an identity outside of the real Dave. And I'm not necessarily saying that's what should have been done here. But that's not what they do. Instead, he brings up something that reminded me a lot of Philosophy 101 discussions of Platonic ideals. This idea that there exists in the world, or in this case, the reader's mind, this absolute concept of something, of a table, for example. There is in your mind an absolute table that all tables are compared against. and all the tables you have seen contribute to that absolute image, while also being imperfect reflections of said image. Which is a cool way to approach a multiverse story, in my opinion. It just isn't supported by the rest of the comic and doesn't reflect most readers' feelings. People are actually invested in Dave Sprite as a character, completely separate from Dave. People were invested in the pre-retcon timeline, and to say that a development as big as this shouldn't affect your perception of these characters kinda makes you wonder, what was the point of all this? Maybe the biggest loser of the retcon was Vriska Circuit, a character so famous and infamous within Homestuck that I'm sure some of you found it weird that I haven't mentioned her yet. I like Vriska. Or to clarify, I like her as a character, but absolutely think she did all the things wrong. Vriska is a very interesting character, initially designed to resemble popular Tumblr hipster and scene fashions of the time, and written to be a bit of a bitch. Remember when I mentioned that multiple trolls were permanently injured/died and that they all have beef with each other, basically? Yeah, she did that, and all of them have beef with her, specifically. She is presented as, even for their culture, a cruel and vindictive girl with a body count in the dozens. One who does not get along well with others and in fact comes across as incredibly arrogant. And for the most part, this is a cope. For Lucis, trolls are raised by these animals called Lucis because they don't raise their own young, keep up, was the demanding type. And by that I mean she demanded the flesh of other young trolls or else was likely to eat her own daughter out of hunger. Vriska essentially had to turn on her peers for the sake of survival. And if you've ever been in a survival situation, especially one involving abuse, that's a pretty relatable sentiment, in spirit at least. I assume you didn't have to kill your peers. Hopefully. Through this experience, she begins reading the journals of her ancestor Marquise Spinneret Mindfang, aka Post-Scratch Arania, a pirate and all-around badass, and Vriska absolutely idolizes her. She cosplays as her while live-action role-playing with her friends. She talks about her constantly. She essentially models her life after her, even pursuing a boy she knows to the point of mercilessly bullying him, to the point of putting him in a wheelchair for the sake of having a romance just like her ancestor did. She is obsessed with copying her ancestor in all things, especially in her perceived heroism and her role in sculpting other heroes. Compare this.
Would it be on account of my influence? And if so, would I exert this influence by taking his will or winning his heart? So I must have patience to take up my role in a story of heroism. It is a tale that reads to me as though lifted from a child's story, yet I know I'd be a fool to doubt its veracity entirely.
To this.
The choices you make affect the destiny of the universe you create, as well as the type of hero you become. It would have been nice if someone was around to explain all this to me and let me have some control over my own fate. I had to do this a much less pleasant way. I'm sparing you that indignity.
And you start to understand her particular brand of mania. Vriska is someone with very poor self-esteem, a child's sense of self-esteem, who puts her self-worth on her capital I importance. She doesn't need to be good or nice. She needs to be the most important person in the universe. She needs to be the hero, the protagonist, and she does a lot of horrible things, causes a lot of plot trouble in the name of that. A lot of her arc is predictably breaking her down and showing her why that's not a very good way to be through punishing her. The first guy she tries to mold into a hero buckles under the pressure. The second does become a hero and then is repelled by the kind of person she is, and arguably got to that place in spite of her anyway. In her big moment, she attempts to go fight Jack Noir all by herself, and is killed before she can even get there, by her old friend, actually. Terezi is able to use her powers to see that Vriska might have won that fight, but that it would have meant the rest of their deaths, and that's not a price Terezi wants to pay. Vriska then has to wander as a ghost, and slowly has to come to the realization that she is more powerless than she assumed she was. She makes all these plans, working with Mina and Arania to raise a ghost army, trying to find an important artifact, and is mostly denied, time and time again. She cannot keep the army together herself. John refuses to bring her back to life. John ends up taking the artifact, mostly by accident. She is abandoned by Arania, and that's pretty much the end of it for her. She's wandering the dream bubbles with Mina, pretending like this doesn't kill her, like this doesn't go against everything she thought she knew about herself, pretending to be content. She even starts modeling herself after Mina a bit, getting an embarrassing tattoo, getting piercings like Mina. She is so clearly a void of a person, someone who never actually understands who she herself is, that an ending like this seemed kind of genius to me. We just had to wait for the inevitable breakdown. And then the retcon happens, and it turns out that the only thing wrong with her is that her friends didn't trust her to get shit done, I guess. The major change in the retcon is that Terezi doesn't kill Vriska, John knocks her out. I guess you're supposed to assume she worked on herself off screen? Literally, who gives a shit? Not me anymore. This has the major knock-on effect of Vriska essentially rising up as leader and keeping the crew together, as well as circumventing the encounter that resulted in all of them dying, setting the retcon in motion in the first place. Yeah, all that cool character analysis I did of her, throw that right in the garbage. Apparently there's nothing wrong with modeling yourself after an impossible ideal. There's nothing wrong with self-centeredly trying to bully your way into the position of big damn hero. It's cool, it's fine, I'm fine. The narrative went from being critical of Vriska and of a certain mindset, a mindset that had its roots in the meta language and theming of this comic, to just deciding she was right, actually. It goes from making a point about how it's wrong to view yourself as the most important person in the universe and how that is dysfunctional, childish thinking, to deciding that, yes, she's the most important person in the universe, all in service of the author's favorite character getting a happy ending. To add insult to injury, post-retcon Vriska comes in to scold pre-retcon Vriska for giving up, and she steals Mina on the way out. Yeah, I think I hate Homestuck, actually. Let's take a breath together. Okay? I wanted to thank you guys. My last video sent me over to 500 subs, and that was a big step for me. The video itself didn't do as well as I'd hoped, but in case you're interested, I made another big video about how to train your dragon and escapism that to me is really interesting and worth a watch. Of course, the next sub goal is 1,000, which will put me in a good place as far as the YouTube partner program goes. Aside from that, there are the normal things to do, like leave a comment, special comment to leave if you've made it this far. Just type your favorite troll's name in their typing quirk with no other context. I'll be sure to reply with a thank you. Channel memberships are also up. It's one tier, but I actually have 3 Patreon tiers. Doing either will get your name read out loud right here, and it also keeps my YouTube dream alive without having to accept icky sponsorships. It keeps the content on the channel quality, and it keeps it coming often. Aside from that, there's streams which I do here and on Twitch weekly, as well as my Ko-fi. Ko-fi? Ko-fi? I've been pronouncing it Ko-fi, but now I keep on hearing everyone say the latter. I don't know. Good for one-time donations as well as commissions. I do pretty much all the art on this channel unless stated otherwise, including in videos, including the talk sprite that stands before you, so hit me up. Special thanks, of course, goes to Luck and Breadfast Cereal 8201. Thank you for your support. I literally could not do this without you. And a very special thanks to the voice actors that lent their talents, helping make this video truly pop. All their socials are in the description. With that, let's get back to the show. Okay, last big criticism, number 3. It's pretty clear that Hussey's involvement in these pages is minimal. Not that Homestuck was ever a one-man show, not that there have never been guest artists, but for a substantial portion of Act 6, it is really just pre-ready assets and art that does not resemble Hussey's style. And yes, some of you may argue that art styles change, but even looking at some of their more current work, Cyclonials, that doesn't seem to be the case here. Now, you might also be thinking, well, maybe Hussey is focusing more on writing. Maybe this is just some good delegation. No. The length and frequency of pester logs, or just dialogue by this point, they kind of dropped the chat thing because all the characters are meeting each other in person at this point, goes down significantly. I wish I had official metrics from actspages.net, but it looks like they're still catching up with the official release having wrapped up pretty recently still, time of recording. Like, this was the portion of the comic that me and Quixby reviewed for our final Homestuck book club, and reading it didn't take nearly as long as the others. The others, especially the section right beforehand, sometimes required multiple 2-hour-plus reading sessions, even pacing myself out over the course of a month. This was, in comparison, a breeze, but not in a good way. It became obvious to me very quickly that this big, giant story probably wasn't going to be answering every little question, if only because of the sheer lack of space it was giving itself to. And this baffled me a bit, because there was nothing stopping them from simply having a higher word count here, or having more pages, having denser pages, especially with more people involved in the process now. This wasn't a TV show. They weren't canceled. They just decided to end it, and end it in a way that cuts out one of the more interesting things about this comic. Something I mentioned a while ago, the fact that this really is the insane ramblings of one insane person. That it is a peek into Hussey's weird little mind through this weird little art piece. By this end, that feeling is entirely lost. You can barely even feel Hussey's presence at this point. Barely feel Hussey's presence. Who is he? Jesus Christ? Did I actually write that? What the fuck? This brings me to what the three big criticisms have in common. Hussey kind of stopped caring. I came across this really interesting Polygon article by Anna Diaz in which Hussey promotes their, at the time, new work Cyclonials, as well as discussing Hussey's feelings on fandom post-Homestuck. This article is promotional material first and foremost, and as per material like that, it's pretty nice to Hussey. Nicer than I've been, and all things considered, I don't think I've been that mean. It also slings some casual shit Sarah Zed's way by implying she's just another drama-hungry YouTuber, and if I think about all that too much, I'm going to get mad again. There's a quote that I think is telling.
But understanding that Cyclonials is chiefly an anti-cult narrative should help point to how I view the Homestuck phenomenon. I came to regard that fandom as being pretty close to a cult. Not formally, and nowhere near as dangerous more conventional cults can be, but close enough to draw meaningful comparisons. And that's about how I've come to regard all fandoms now.
I've made it no secret that the fandom turned a bit on Hussey at the end, and regardless of where blame for all that lies, that had to have been a lot, to say the least. I think this is a revealing statement, but through my research, I've found myself flip-flopping on whether I agree with this statement or whether they have a point, at least. The fandom lover in me, the one who made her first friends through fandom, the one that learned to engage with people through fandom, the one that has had so many amazing experiences and honestly very few negative ones in my decade and a half of engaging with fandom, that person believes Hussey is wrong here. Fandoms are not like cults, she says assuredly, at least not generally. Can certain individuals engage in cult-like behavior? Sure, but this is a stretch implying a more centralized experience than what is typical. It's conflating community with the concept of cult. If fandom is cult, then that makes, what, near every person on Earth who has ever been into something cultish? But then I come across some of the wilder stories of the fandom. I come across other fans who maybe had less positive experiences, who maybe even don't like Hussey much, who agree with them on this point. I remember that. As much as I often feel like this fandom was close to my heart, I was, in many ways, experiencing it secondhand, barely coming in at the tail end after pretty much everything had gone wrong and people stopped tuning in. Another quote.
When I speak of fandom, I'm referring to the activity which is more indicative of obsession, hyperfixation.
Huh. No, that's...
Anyone who presides over something popular is forced to play the role of an informal cult leader, which is what it felt like throughout most of Homestuck's run, and even well beyond.
Yeah. Personal opinions aside, I kind of think Hussey may have a point. And it basically kills the fandom lover in me to admit that. See, if I trust Hussey on anything, I trust them when they say that presiding over the Homestuck fandom felt like being a cult leader. No one could do that as a small indie comic artist and come out of that experience fine. And this was before internet personality became a career path, so in many ways Hussey was going in completely blind, without any of the conventional wisdom new gens like me understand before we even upload our first video. To me, it is no coincidence that the drop in output and quality happened when it did. Homestuck peaked as the most popular thing ever for a bit there, and then a bit of controversy happened, as they tend to do, and honestly, I think Hussey just got burned out. And I'm not the first one to say that. It's kind of a surprise it didn't happen earlier, considering the insane pace the comic was made at during the first several acts. 5+ pages a day, for 3 years, with very few breaks. That's kind of insane. All the factors are here for burnout, and honestly, I kind of feel for Hussey. No wonder they didn't feel very good about Homestuck in the end. No wonder the idea of fandom was kind of tainted for them. And with all the resentment brewing, with all the toxicity in the air, the maybe least surprising part of the story is very few people came out of it feeling good about any of it. I respectfully disagree with the idea that fandom itself is cultish or otherwise an inherently negative experience. But I get it. And I'm not without sympathy for those who feel that way, including Hussey. I'm sure that once the NDA involving the settlement with the Odd Gentleman ends, more is going to come out. And who knows, maybe we'll even get another lawsuit out of it. But I think here ends my interest in pointing fingers or otherwise playing the blame game. Whatever happened behind the scenes happened. No one was happy about it. We got the ending we got, and whatever fans were left, pretty much the second it wrapped up. The fandom seemed to disappear into thin air overnight, and with the website completely broken for years, nearly a decade, no new fans were coming in either. Homestuck was over. I tried to read these. I really did. Okay, cliff notes. This is all secondhand. If I make a mistake, I am so sorry. Don't kill me. There was an epilogue, or rather there were two, one called Meat and one called Candy. They explore alternate but similar timelines and are meant to tie up loose ends story-wise and character-wise respectively, each half focusing on, essentially, the desires of the two types of Homestuck fans, the wiki editors and the fanfic writers. These epilogues are kind of controversial, and the people who like them most compare them to good fanfiction, and that comparison is intended. They're formatted like AO3 posts, like literally they copied AO3's exact website layout and format for these epilogues, and while Hussey did have some involvement, they're credited as a writer. This is no longer their baby, and the epilogues are explicitly non-canon. I actually did get through the prologue of the epilogues, as well as a bit of Meat, and I found the prose to be pretty decent, if a bit flowery in the way that AO3 fics can sometimes be. My genuine sticking point was just how mean-spirited they were, characters getting injured and dying in horrible ways. They are introspective in a way that I think is neat, effectively meta in a way that Act 6 wishes it was, and according to some, managed to give them genuine closure as fans as they attempt to answer the question, what do you do after Homestuck? Apparently you make a sequel. Yeah, a bit of a curveball. Okay, clarification. This isn't technically an official sequel, in that it's even more dubiously canon than the epilogues, and it has an entirely new creative team, mostly populated by former fans. It, in many ways, is just a particularly well-publicized fan continuation. However, it's also being funded by the official Homestuck Patreon, so throw that idea completely in the garbage. As far as I'm concerned, this is official. It's also a bit less divisive than the epilogue, since for a long while the consensus was just that they were bad. Again, I can't speak to that. From what I understand, it had, at the very least, a rocky start, though it has slowly found its fans in recent years, and honestly, good for them, especially considering how much of the louder early criticism kind of just amounted to transphobic whinging. I hope they stick it out, but I don't know how much this succeeded in winning over some of the very burned fans. As someone who could barely even bring herself to read the epilogues when it came out, it didn't really interest me. Some of the art looked appealing enough, but at the end of the day, it just wasn't Homestuck. There would never be another. Okay, so now we know how we got here. Homestuck happened, it was good, a bunch of fans got burned, Hussey got burnt out, it got bad, they half succeeded in continuing it, and then they announced the pilot. August 9th, 2025. A little under 2 months later, it gets released on September 27th, 2025. People were very normal about it. Final consensus was that it was pretty okay. I already talked about all that, though. I told you like way too many words ago that I would explain why it was doomed from the start, and in order to discuss that, I gotta talk about adaptation a bit. Comic adaptations are pretty common nowadays. Some of the biggest, most profitable movies ever are comic adaptations. The anime industry as a whole is predicated on comic adaptations. Comic to live action, or especially comic to animation adaptations, are some of the easiest you can make. Not that any adaptation is easy. This is because the two mediums aren't so different at the end of the day. They're both visual, are concerned with things like continuity, are oftentimes paced similarly, utilize dialogue in similar ways. It's not a one-to-one, but a good amount of anime do just fine making quick adaptations using the manga as storyboards, essentially. Considering Homestuck is a webcomic, it should translate easily, but it doesn't really. It ends up having to condense hundreds of pages to just a few minutes, has to change up multiple aspects of the story to make it make sense in the new medium, and while the strife animation is flashy, it doesn't really match the impact of playing through it yourself. It struggles a bit, and while it has the potential to find its own footing and become its own thing, it was never going to manage that in 11 minutes. The interesting thing is that those aren't problems you normally come across with comic adaptations. Those are video game adaptation problems. When I said that there will never be another Homestuck, that there will never be another comic like Homestuck, this is mostly because Homestuck is a visual novel that just happens to be hosted on a website. It's long, includes interesting but ultimately kind of tangential interactive segments where you talk to other characters in the overworld. It has a score, it has flashy animations. Cyclonials, Hussey's new project that I keep alluding to, is literally a visual novel. This is a visual novel, and if you've ever seen a visual novel adaptation, then the problems that plague the pilot are pretty predictable, actually. I'll compare it directly to the Danganronpa anime adaptation. Does it seem to be paced at the speed of light to the point of certain moments losing impact? Yes. Does it feel like the Cliff Notes version of itself? Yes. Do the characters lose a bit of their charm through the condensing? Yes. Is it a fine thing to recommend someone if you're trying to get them into the source material, but you suspect they don't have the attention span? Yep. Do you just kind of wish you were reading the comic, playing the game? Also, yes. For context, I don't hate Danganronpa the animation, and if it's not clear, I like the Homestuck pilot. I'm also capable of recognizing its flaws, and recognizing that between rewatching it or replaying it, I would rather do the latter, and really only do the former if I'm pressed for time, and that's a legitimate service, that's a legitimate reason to exist as much as any. When I say that there will never be another Homestuck, I don't mean that the pilot shouldn't exist, that any series that comes of it is dead on arrival. I really want to see the series, honestly. I really hope they do release more. It will just never be Homestuck for me. My How to Train Your Dragon video, which statistically no one has watched, has at its center a very good point about nostalgia. How reliving old faves like this over and over again through new adaptations and sequels and addendums in order to feed our own nostalgia is not healthy at the end of the day, and that the industry that profits off this nostalgia may low-key be evil. It's also about how it's okay to experience a good piece of art, to have it linger in your heart, to have it have changed you as a person, but that eventually you need to let it go. This is a thing that happened in the past. I loved it. It has passed now. That's okay. All that being said, I don't know how constructive it is to just spend all your time harping on these new adaptations and addendums as inferior reflections, especially not when real artists put a not inconsiderable amount of work and soul into making these things for an industry that devalues them more and more each passing year. You can criticize the industry. You can vote with your wallet and skip these in favor of new original projects made by hungry artists. To some extent, I think that explains the numbers here. And I'm kind of proud of that, of what that means for us as a greater animation community. There will never be another Homestuck, but there will also never be another Knights of Guinevere, or Hazbin Hotel, or Amazing Digital Circus, and honestly, it was a privilege to experience Homestuck, and to experience this fandom. And that it was so unique, so one of a kind in its space, makes it even more of a privilege, even if its end wasn't what I hoped it would be. I've had pieces of media change the trajectory of my life, but maybe none so much as Homestuck. Seeing the fan art of The Trolls made me want to become a digital artist. It made me beg my parents for my first drawing pad, and inspired me to improve. Is a part of the reason I eventually went to art school to get my associates, and a part of the reason I am here on YouTube, trying to make things work with the lovely little format known as the video essay. Maybe because I wasn't as involved as the others, I never got to see the worst of it. But I find myself a little baffled and maybe even hurt when people say that the fandom was a complete garbage fire, even though it definitely was. For a long while, it was everything I looked up to and aspired to. The comic and the fandom, because those things are inextricably linked. It got me interested in the process of creation. It made me a better person, I think. Homestuck is everything. There will never be another Homestuck. Luckluck asks, when working on long projects, how do you prevent yourself from getting burnt out? Well, I haven't gone on for long enough that burnout could be an issue, but it may be worth mentioning that I'm still at the point where I can still pick and choose what I work on without things like sponsorships getting in the way. If there's an aspect of the project that I find I don't want to do, I try to just move on, either do another aspect that I want to do more, or maybe consider if that part is necessary at all and cut it if not. I've also thrown out entire video topics if I find that I'm just not enjoying the research portion very much. That's honestly why the Voltron Defenders of the Universe video is not coming out, for example. Hope that helps.